NFL Nation, there's a lot going on in Cleveland right now. From the draft to the offseason moves that they've done, and of course, the elephant in the room that is the quarterback situation. So I got my guy Jeff Lloyd here from Browns 3D to discuss what's going on with the Browns and everything that's happening with the quarterback situation. Let's get into it. The man, he's no myth, the legend. My guy Jeff Lloyd is in the building today to join us to talk all things Cleveland Browns. Good sir, how you feeling out there? How's everything? How's life? How's the things in Browns 3D?
We're good, over a week now in basically the dust settling on the 2025 NFL draft. I think most anybody who follows the Browns probably feel it went a little different than maybe expected. And we were live streaming the entire thing, and Thursday night, as the news was starting to come down that this trade was gaining more and more legitimacy, and then the fact that it was pretty much in fact going to go down, it kind of it just made really for us, it just made the show authentic, basically, because and I kind of described it weirdly as almost kind of like watching the OJ Bronco ride from back in the day. Because like, we all came in prepared. We thought we were, knew what Cleveland was going to do at 2. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, take your notes, shove them in the garbage, because we're basically just going to take this as it comes.
Okay. Yeah. We were definitely chopping at the bit and definitely speculating hard on our side exactly what the Browns were going to do it to, because I felt like the draft didn't start till we got to that point. And of course we had the trade. So yes, we're going to get into that and everything else as far as the Browns are concerned, from the top end of the free agency market to down to what happened to the draft last week. So let's start off with talking about how we're going to do things here today. So we're getting into, is this a turning point for the Cleveland Browns? We're going to rate the Browns off season. So in totality, there's a lot of things and a lot of moves that have happened here when it comes down to the Browns. So in getting into that, let's start off with the offseason here. How would you rate the offseason in its totality based upon the moves that's been going on here? Now, there was a lot of movement in the Browns. I actually underestimated what happened there as far as how many people were, were coming and going out of the Browns organization in one offseason. But here's the list. We have signings, re-signings, extensions. We got trades, release. So, give me your, broad overview of how you rate this. What do you like? What you didn't like in regards to what the Browns did in offseason for free agency?
I think first and foremost, this probably starts at the whole Myles Garrett scenario, probably.
Yep.
And there was no surprise that Myles, was displeased. Anybody that was surprised by it. I mean, look, if you follow this team, you were displeased. So how were the guys who were playing for this team not necessarily displeased? A lot of it, probably came from everything that was put into the trade for Deshaun Watson, and I don't think it was so much that it was and it could be, who knows, that would be speculation, of course, but it could be that it just didn't pan out. Because this team, with all the draft assets that they gave to Houston to acquire him, the money, I don't think anybody honestly cared, because that really never really hamstringed the Browns in any way from any moves they really wanted to do in the time that Watson, was here. So that certainly didn't have anything to do with it. But as this team in 2023, the offensive linemen got a little bit older and they were hurt. They weren't playing to the best of their abilities. 24, kind of the same case. And it was like, man, we're down a couple of guys here. Those couple of guys were the picks that were in Houston. You know what I'm saying? These guys and those picks would now probably be relevant players for the Cleveland Browns.
Good point.
And I think that's what really probably hurt them in 2024, because there should have been time where guys were starting to step up, make their mark for this team, and they weren't there. So, in Myles, the end result of exactly why he chose to do it the way he did. Everybody knew that he wasn't going anywhere, because basically, if the Browns had to move him, they were basically nuking the roster, and every veteran that was here was gone. There was just no way they could financially keep everybody around, because the dead cap money that would have went, with trading Myles. I mean, the roster would have been a joke. I'm sure at the end of the day, Miles probably maybe would have done it differently. Because the thing is, Cleveland was going to give him this contract regardless.
Okay.
He outplayed it. 2023 he was Defensive Player of the Year. He was a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year in 2024.
Hmm.
He outplayed the contract extension he was on. Everybody knew it. It wasn't a surprise. But that dalliance went on, and obviously it went through the Super Bowl. It went through the combine a little bit. And I know the Browns didn't really appreciate, Miles taking, it was like, we know. We heard you the first time. We didn't hear you the second time. We need to hear you the third time. We understand that you're not happy. Um, and we'll get to the quarterback position because I mean that's the biggest thing. But they kind of had to let Miles go. This is where this team is right now. We're set to commit to you for another 5 years, obviously at a large, large dollar amount. So for Miles, that worked out. I would say overall, free agency for me, I don't want to say it was a surprise, but it just kind of felt like, they didn't basically take as many swings as I thought they were gonna.
Mm.
Y this was a team that needed 2 tight ends this year. They've only acquired 1 to this point. This is a team that everybody felt and it was there were a tough couple of positional groups that were big to the Browns this offseason. Quarterback was one of them. There really was just not an answer for anybody, the quarterback position, whether it was the draft, free agency, trading. There just wasn't really a lot of options like that. Wide receiver was another one. Browns knew they needed help at the wide receiver. The draft didn't offer what it normally offers at the wide receiver position. And
True.
free agency, the way everybody got paid last year in the offseason, it led to a very small possible market that was going to be available this year. Um, but the team that signed one free agency, anybody that's on this list that you have here is not slated to start. Malik Collins was a nice signing, but he's probably going to play more nickel and dime as an interior pass rusher. He's just not really, that strong of a run defender. He's
Right.
made his mark in this league as a pass rusher from the interior.
Hmm.
The linebackers, you brought back Devin Bush, you signed Jerome Baker, but now looking at the way that room breaks or hopefully breaks for Cleveland, I don't think either one of those guys is necessarily a starter. So in with the way that all works, and then you think what they're gonna do, then they do it, and then you kind of go back and try to read the tea leaves of why they were doing what they're doing. The Bulls didn't need to adjust their finances. They could have kept going every year and then just, obviously with guys who were later on in their contracts extensions, just saying, hey, we're going to guarantee all your money. So therefore we can create more cap for ourselves. We can bring in more players, etc. Nobody is opposed to that. It hopefully just makes the team better. I just thought that maybe they would be, a little bit more active. But I think at the end of the day, the Browns, feel that maybe 2025 is basically the launch point.
Mm.
If they do well, if they're successful in 2025, obviously that's all well and good. But I think they truly felt that when 2024 ended, that 2025 maybe wasn't necessarily the year. Maybe it was, kind of getting the house back in order, making a run for 2026. With a lot of draft choices, they made 7 in this year's draft. They already have 9 for next year's draft. It's a chance to get your team exponentially, hopefully younger and exponentially cheaper. They don't need to, but you want to know what? If you're paying high payroll, it's fine. But if you're not going to have continued success year in, year out, then what exactly are you paying the money for?
Mm.
I think that was kind of one of the things here was it all kind of worked together. Look, we can't fill all our needs this year. We're not going to go out and sign some big name free agents that at the end of the day won't be something that's going to totally make a difference in the overall success of this team in 2025.
Okay. So based upon, I'm going to pinpoint a couple of things that I think that were, tell signs, and to your points about what they signed in free agency. But I did have a glaring question that you kind of maybe kind of may have a light bulb go off for me in regards to what the Browns are doing for this season. So would you argue or say that this is more of a transitional year for the Browns? As as opposed to, a competing year, as a transition or a building block toward the future?
I mean, you look at it, this way. Look, and everybody, look, every NFL team thinks they are in it every season. Okay, look, you're going to week one, you're putting your best 22 out there. And basically, you play with the theory of, maybe the bye week, where you play first 6, 7 weeks. And then we evaluate where our team is at. Look, just as injuries can happen to your own team, injuries can happen to your opponents, can happen with other teams within your division.
Mhm.
How many times we always say at the end of the year, "Well, didn't see them coming this year."
Right.
And, sometimes things happen. Look, the Browns are going to return an offensive line of Jack Conklin, of Wyatt Teller at right guard, Ethan Posick at center, Joel Bitonio at left guard, and DeJuan Jones, who had a really strong 2023 rookie season. You know, for the most part, that offensive line's kinda old. They've
Mhm.
dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years,
Mhm.
but that's pretty good offensive line if they're healthy and they go out there. That
True.
could be a team. You're gonna take, most likely, in my opinion, it's gonna be Joe Flacco. I don't think it's gonna be Kenny Pickett, and Joe Flacco's gonna start week 1. You're gonna put your best guys out there that think give you the best chance to win.
Mhm.
You get to, October, you're 4-2, you know, all of a sudden, hey, that's 6 games, that's 1/3. How are the young kids looking? Is everybody chipping in? Are we still healthy?
Mhm.
Then you roll in. You get to the point, I think, where, you start to look at your record. And, maybe once you get to 500 or you get to the wrong end of 500, and that's when you start saying, hey, okay, now this maybe isn't our year. I mean, Joe Flacco, what he did in 2023, do I think it's possible we're going to have that magical run again? More likely than not, it's probably not possible.
Right.
But he can succeed within this offensive system. He can succeed for Coach Stefanski. Jerry Jeudy looks, like he could play the part that Amari Cooper was playing in 2023. Njoku played really, really well with Joe Flacco down the stretch in 2023.
That he
So,
did.
there are factors here that you could believe this team could contend early. Is it going to be 17 games worth of contending? You don't possibly think so, but it doesn't mean they're not gonna try to put their best foot forward on it to begin the year.
I like that. Okay. Yeah, and to your point, based upon what they signed in free agency and things of that nature, it's a lot of depth pieces here. I would argue that maybe Joy Tryon Shoyinka had his run at that edge position opposite Miles to start as a veteran. And also what kind of did in the draft as well. But yeah, I see a lot of depth pieces here, not
I
mind
think
blowing blood
with
blowers.
Tryon, and what I think they liked about Tryon, and I'm not slapping that 3rd name onto him. He was Joe Tryon at UW. He's always gonna be Joe Tryon.
Right.
I think the Browns, I know, liked him during his draft cycle, but he went down to Tampa, and he was kinda playing more stand up,
It
in a
was.
3-4.
Mhm.
So, the Browns, I think, like the ability there as a pass rusher. Isaiah McGuire, going into his 3rd year, has really developed into a really solid base end. Does not have the overall athleticism that normally translates to elite pass rushing numbers.
Mhm.
So that's probably the one thing holding him back. But I wouldn't be surprised if he was your starting base end, just because he grades out really well. He does his assignment. He sets the edge. He's really good in that regard. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was an Abdul Carter guy at 2. So
Right.
I really, thought that would be the way to go for them. I don't disagree with what they did. But I think the room overall, like, if you were entertaining Abdul Carter at any point, you would have thought that at some point you would have drafted another pass rusher, and that's something they did not do. I
Mhm.
think the room's probably a little light right now. They have some interesting guys that would be like 5th, 6th, or 7th right now on the depth chart. That they might give a little bit of a chance to develop here. But again, if it were me, I probably would a little bit more pass rusher.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I think it's they did some I guess you can say the building, some inner building, some depth building, but it wasn't a lot of splashes outside of signing the Miles to that hefty deal that he got.
Mhm.
With his $40 million per year extension. So yeah, should be definitely interesting what they do going forward. If they maybe these guys that kind of hanging out there, maybe those veterans that are hanging out there so far that haven't been signed yet, maybe they'll bring them into the fold if they feel like they have or need something that they are lacking after they evaluate their draft picks. But speaking of that, let's talk about the draft and what they did and in late April. So how would you rate your draft class in totality? And it was definitely some, I won't call it controversy, but some buzz, some headlines to be made in regards to what they did in the draft. And I honestly, truly, I love what they did in the draft from a personnel perspective. Like all these kids that you had in the first 4 picks that you picked graded high for me in my draft prep. So, of course, tell me how you feel about the trade. Give me your full on opinion on that, and then just give me your overall take on what you did in the draft and what you like and what you didn't like.
Thank you, but this also goes now basically to what the overall theme was of probably the entire offseason for them. For me, and one of the reasons I was so strongly on Abdul Carter was, hey, Abdul Carter alone to that defense makes a huge difference for that defense.
Oh
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? You pair him with Miles Garrett, all of a sudden that defense as a whole looks better. As
Hmm.
appealing as Travis Hunter may have been to anybody, you still need to have a quarterback answer yet. You're like
Right.
you didn't even know. So it was like, man, so now, I've got Jerry Judy long term. I'm now going to commit to Hunter long term. I don't even know who the quarterback is yet.
Right.
And when the rumblings were coming, and it was like, all right, well, if you're going to do this with Jacksonville, that's fine. But unless I hear 2026 first round pick, I'm probably not going to like this trade. So I think they got to the point where they got Jacksonville and, the rookie GM super excited to make his mark on the franchise he's working for.
Hmm.
Hunter had been out there as saying, hey, the Jags were my childhood team, so that wasn't kind of hidden. So once you got that trade done, it was like, all right, now we can really get the opportunity here to go to business, go to work. And I think one of the other things, was trying to make sure that they were drafting players that they were high on as players who were productive in college. But I really think there was a pretty strong emphasis on, like, I want gamers, dude. Are these guys really good kids? Is football what they're into? And look, not everybody is nowadays. The world is so diverse, and obviously athletes they have so many other interests. But they wanted to make sure that they had guys where football was kind of like the first part of their life. And hey, I have other interests, and I understand, in order to achieve those interests and get to those things, I've got to find a way to basically pay my bills first. So all
Right.
of these guys truly motivated. When it first went down and you knew you were going from 2 to 5, it was like, well, Hunter's out the door. No possibility there. Carter's now out the door. You knew everybody knew New England oil Campbell was the thing. And then it was, initially it was like, well, Mason Graham, but Mason Graham was a universal top 5 player. Anywhere you went, they had Mason Graham as a top 5 player.
Oh yeah.
The Browns, for me, one of the issues I've always had with this team while I've been covering it is they never really put much long-term attention into the defensive tackle position. It didn't make much sense to me. You had Miles, it would have been easy to piece together the interior, and that would have worked. But now you drafted Mike Hall last year in the second round. You drafted Jawan Briggs last year in the seventh round, who played pretty well. Now with Mason Graham, you've got now a 3-year window of defensive tackle. That's
Hmm.
it. These guys are all locked in for 3 years.
Right.
I think Graham will improve as a pass rusher, really good against the run game. Anytime you're talking about a guy playing on the interior with a high school wrestling background, it certainly opens up your eyes. You know what I'm saying? You know the guy gets leverage, all that type of stuff.
Hmm.
So I had zero issue with the pick at the time. Um, Especially knowing, the trade down and all the capital. And basically what the Browns said is, look, in a perfect world, we take the quarterback at 2, we don't even pick up the phone. There was no quarterback to be had at 2. So, and I also think that they said there's only a couple of positions they would ever consider taking at number 2 overall. One was quarterback, the other one was defensive end. They didn't think another position was essentially worth number 2 overall, period. See how
Okay.
that works out. Sweetson was interesting. And the reason is he was at UCLA for 2 years and basically did nothing but play special teams. So it was odd he even stayed there, right? In this world of portal now, with
Hmm.
something ain't going right for a kid. Schlesinger, not only were things not really going his way, he stayed committed. And they're like, look, we got a linebacker. He's putting some weight. We're going to put him at edge. He ended up getting drafted by the Titans. Schlesinger got a shot. Led the nation in solo tackles with 90. What I find the most impressive thing is it's 1 year of playing. There's another jump coming in Carson Schwarzenegger's game.
I believe
You know
that.
what I'm saying? Maybe he'll struggle a little bit as a rookie. Rookies
Mhm.
do. But you got to think, in a year and a half, 2 years from now, we're talking about Carson Schwarzenegger, as a guy who's challenging for one of the top linebackers of the game. Everybody we talked to in our intel really thought the Browns preferred Henderson, and they just liked his big playability. You really
Mhm.
couldn't go wrong with his high running backs. But I think why it was Judkins maybe over Henderson is they felt they truly needed that, you know, 20 carry guy.
Yeah,
Kind of
size.
for me,
Yeah.
kind
Mhm.
of hey, the Nick thing's not going on anymore. I think the Nick it was kind of them telling us we think the Nick Chubb thing is over.
Right.
But Judkins, tested more athletic than he looked on tape.
Mhm.
I call him the deeper car running back. Always seems to find some contact. Maybe when he doesn't even need to. We universally loved the Hall Fanning pick. I think there's just so many things you can do with him. You can obviously use him as a second tight end. You can use him as a big spot. He can line up outside. You want to use him in some fullback looks just to create different looks to throw him the ball that way too. I
Mhm.
think he's really fun. Another thing, 30, 20 years old.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
20 years old. Again, another guy just scratching the surface. And there's not a lot of pressure on him. Obviously, Judy's going to catch a lot of passes. Certainly, David Njoku's going to get a lot of targets. Fannin can learn and work his way in. The Gabriel thing is really going to hit me because we all really felt, yes, they were going to address quarterback. They were going to draft A2 quarterbacks. You felt they had a lot of interest in Jalen Monroe. It made sense as college offense coordinator in 2023. He was the offense coordinator of your staff.
Mhm.
He went 2 picks before that, but if the Browns wanted him, you could have taken him at 33. You could have taken him at 36. You could have taken him at 67. Obviously, at the end of the day, the Browns didn't feel the progression that was going to be needed, the work that was going to be needed for Jalen Milroe was something they wanted to sort of. Um, Dylan Gabriel turns out, him and Stefanski, the Browns really liked him. He was their second to last trip. As everybody thought they were flying to Colorado. They flew past Colorado, went out to Eugene, Oregon, spent their time with Dylan Gabriel. They spent time with every quarterback this cycle. And I think they like the age. I think they like the fact that he went to 3 different programs and established himself within every program,
Mhm.
ended up being the true quarterback leader of all of those programs. Ideal size? No. Does he throw the ball well enough? Absolutely. He's more athletic than people think he is. Their plan was to basically say, we're going to Sam's Club the quarterback position this year. We're just going to get as many as we can.
Hmm.
And we'll figure out, if any of them could possibly be the long-term answer. We know Joe Flacco's not. We know Kenny Pickett's probably not. Dylan Sampson, again, another kid, 20 years old.
Mhm.
All-time leader in touchdowns scored in a season at University of Tennessee. Tennessee has turned out some incredible running backs over the years. 22 touchdowns for Dylan Sampson. 5'8", 200, different style than Quinshon Judkins. He finds open daylight, he's gone. He's a very good short yardage running back for a guy who's only 5'8" and change 200 pounds. That
Right.
is evident by 22 rushing touchdowns. They just really like the player. They weren't sure, how much interest they had in double dipping at the running back position. The running back position, for as deep as it was, it kind of went slow. You would have thought with a really good class with that many guys deep, you didn't know how it would work. Once figured a guy like Sampson was going to be gone, top 100, there he was 126.
Mhm.
And then you had the 2 picks remaining. He had interest in Shador the whole time. They liked him. They liked the player. There is a fit on the Browns staff that works towards Shador and his family from the past. Bill Musgrave, all things that they liked and thought could have worked. And I think again, they said, look, and the Browns, they had 100 some odd players on their board. So the odds were pretty good by 144. There wasn't much left. And they
True.
have their backups. They
Right.
have backup offensive line. They have backups everywhere. So
Mhm.
to draft a kid at the time they had 162, 166 and 192. And Andrew Berry does not like to cut his draft picks. So the last thing he wanted to do was take a draft pick at 166 or 192 and maybe lose the guy.
Right.
They don't want to spend 3 months on a guy and just not have him anymore.
Mhm.
So they go with Shador. Yes, he was not the number 2 overall player in the pick, but he certainly wasn't the 144th player in the pick either. Player in the draft. So again, it's just more competition. They've now got 4 quarterbacks. And it's everybody get to a corner. We're going to ring the bell, and let's see what everybody's got. And I think the Browns just after all the Deshaun Watson stuff, just basically needed to reset the entire room. Moving on from a guy like DTR as well, and
Mhm.
just get some fresh blood in here. Maybe one is recycled fresh blood in Joe Flacco, but just a whole bunch of new people in here. The Browns didn't want people to talk about the Watson situation anymore. And the best way to do that was basically to just bring in 4 new quarterbacks.
Okay. Well, there you go. All right. So speaking of quarterbacks, is a great transition to our last question. So, the $1 million question of the room for Cleveland right now, who do you think starts? And I guess we can do 2 parts. Who do you think starts initially? And then how do you think the season will end at quarterback?
If you ask me, I think Kenny Pickett over the summer is going to end up being the odd guy out. Um, just because, you're not going to, again, look, you can't cut Gabriel or Sanders. You're not going to be able to retain them. So you
Right.
can't cut them and say put them on practice squad. It doesn't work that way. You have to expose them to the other 31 teams in the NFL, and
Right.
somebody's going to take them.
Mhm.
You know what Joe can do. And what Joe can do for you, you already know. And the thing is with Joe, Joe's not going to need all the starter reps all summer. So you have the time during the summer. Let Gabriel, work on his game. Let Sanders work on their game. I don't think you're going to ask Joe Flacco to play a preseason game.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? You're not going to do that to a guy who's 40 years old. So the kids can get as much time as they need this summer. And then you're going to see where you're at during the season. Are you in contention or are you not in contention? My belief and what I've said to this point is Joe Flacco is probably your week one starter.
Right.
Who starts the most games in 2025? It's probably either Dylan Gabriel or Shador Sanders. It would depend on which one got the opportunity to start first and how that one did. I'm not sure there's a direct path here. Who would get the first call after Joe Flacco? That'll certainly probably come down to the summer. And, for all intents and purposes, Gabriel is a, gym rat type of guy. Shador, for whatever anybody tried to say through him during the draft cycle, he's been in Cleveland for about 4 or 5 days now. He's come off remarkably well. He's going to high schools, he's talking to kids, he's having throwing sessions. High school kids are calling their buddies, and all of a sudden there were 10 kids there. Now there's 100 kids there, trying to get pictures with Shador, trying to get his attention. He's
Hmm.
been totally accommodating, he's been totally willing. And I think it's going to be one of the biggest things with Shador Sanders is getting to see him inside of basically the Sanders umbrella. What's he going to be like on his own? And look, it's only been a short sample size to this point,
Hmm.
but from what everybody in the city has seen, as far as what the fans have seen in a short, they're ready to fall for him. They're going to turn on you and turn back on you in a heartbeat. It's just the way it goes. They'll love you tomorrow, hate you today. 2 days from now, you're back in good graces. It's just the way it goes with this fandom.
Hmm.
But if they're ready, and Shador could have a great home here if his play, if it does work out for him. So that for me is my idea how it's going to go work out. We're not, Deshaun's not going to be a part of anything this year. I don't know how you can't come over one Achilles surgery.
Let
You
alone
come back
two.
in a your two on the same
Right.
one. So
Right. Exactly.
it's not realistic, and I do believe all intents and purposes are that we're never going to see Deshaun in any type of playing capacity or even suiting up for the Cleveland Browns again. I think they are well beyond past that.
Okay, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Well, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. He feels that Joe Flacco will likely start the season, but he thinks that at some point Dylan Gabriel or Shador Sanders will supersede him, depending on, I guess you can say that, depending on the competition level and where they're at season wise. So, let me add actually one last question. Do you think that it's based upon whether or not how much you're winning, whether or not they'll make a pivot, or it's just will be a natural progression? Period.
That's going to be the tricky part because it's not like either one of these guys are a first round pick, right?
Right.
So it's not like you have that itchiness there. But there is also the fact of, hey, there is nothing, it's these two guys, and we do have 2 first round picks certainly in 2026.
Hmm.
But, how do you weigh that? You know what I'm saying? Because look, if you were 7-4, who's pulling the plug on that?
Yeah, not many.
You know what I'm saying? And you say, oh, well, you have Gabriel, you have Sanders, how are you going to know? How are you going to manage? You can figure the Lions already know. If that draft class in 2026 is where they expect it to be, whatever selection is closer to the top
Hmm.
is going to be a quarterback. I
Gotcha.
mean, if you feel it's a better class, you're going to do it, and it'll be the same for us this year. All right. Well, I mean, you're not saying Gabriel doesn't have a shot. You're not saying Sanders doesn't have a shot. You're saying, look, there's competition.
Right.
They'll win the game. So I don't think they're going to pull the plug there. But, you look at where Baltimore's at. Obviously, I don't know how the Browns, unless something drastically went wrong for Baltimore, how they're contending in the AFC North for the title. But, Cincinnati, they got major issues on defense. Pittsburgh, it looks like it's going to be the Aaron Rodgers thing. And, if that's what they want to do, that's fine.
Right.
We saw this play out for the Jets, and now Aaron is only older. So, I mean, I don't know how
And more
that's necessarily
certainly.
exactly. I mean, I don't know if that's the calling card for a successful season for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But the trouble is, you're in the AFC. I mean, the AFC, it's just an absolute gauntlet.
It's a juggernaut for
So
sure. Yes.
so I don't believe, you tell me they get to 7-4, I'd feel differently. But I think at some point, they're just not going to have enough at the quarterback position to be a competitive team in the AFC, and that's where
Agreed.
it's going to be time to get and you would say in a perfect world, you know, Browns contend for a little bit, maybe the final 8 games, and you say, look, we're gonna give each one of you 4 because I'm gonna give you a puncher's chance. So
Right.
now I got tape on you, and then there's tape to instruct you on how I want you guys to handle your off seasons, what I feel you need to improve on, and the odd part of the conversation of, "Hey, yeah, guys, we're probably still taking a draft, we're still taking a quarterback, we're first round pick, so just so you go out, do what you gotta do, lose your bets, you got an opportunity to contend, but and not only are you competing against each other, you're going to be competing against somebody that the team's going to have something probably, very, very highly invested in coming in, in April of 26.
Understood. Understood. All right. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. So if you don't have any real live intelligent takes on the Browns now, you should after listening to this. That's for sure. I want to thank Jeff once again for gracing us with his presence, giving us his time. Please tell the fans and tell the people out there where they can find you at if they're looking for another Browns podcast to listen to, one of the better ones on the YouTube stratosphere. Please let them know where you can find you at.
The Orange and Brown Report has been around for a long, long time, since 1999, and it's always been based highly on written content. But over at CBS is where you can find the Orange and Brown Report, and they've really trying to pick up the video game, the streaming game. So when it worked out when I joined them in January, basically they were looking for basically a beginning of the nightly streaming network. So Browns 3D on the OBR and YouTube kicks off every week. Weeknight, 6 o'clock. We have various shows each and every evening. A lot of it is based on, talking points deeper from the written content that was put up on the site during the day. Um, you know, we've just, gotten more into live streaming. Certainly, we did every bit of the draft. I'm sure we'll do something in relation to, the schedule release on May 14th. It's really a good group over there, and we really enjoying it. And it was so difficult to cover this team in 2024. It really,
I believe it.
really was. It was
I
just,
believe it.
there wasn't anything positive to say. There was a lot of doom and gloom. And then in all of this, you ended up with the number 2 overall pick. And guess what? It's great. Yeah, there's no quarterback to be had. So, I
Mm.
mean, it really worked out from where it could have been. Oh, man, you got an escape hatch out of the Watson thing. This is perfect. And then it's a one quarterback class in Tennessee's taken. It was,
Yeah.
and that really, but there's a lot of positive about this team. Miles staying certainly helped with that. You know, Browns fans definitely want to win. They're going to go through following another Hall of Fame player that doesn't lead to anything like they did with Joe Thomas. They've
Mm.
gotten a taste of it though, and they definitely want to continue to, basically get to taste more of that success.
Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for Jeff, please check him out on the Browns 3D podcast. And I'll drop the links in the description if you missed out his intro or his exit to let you know where you can find him. And as always, man, we appreciate your time and we thank you for having you. And we'll see you down the road.
Anytime, man. Anytime.
All right. Take care.